Ottawa by now, so I'm not going to...
That's why I tried to screen.
So I don't think he's probably with us anymore, at least on the phone. He'd be with us spiritually to some degree anyway. So I'm going to call upon our panelists that spoke earlier, any of you who have any follow-up questions, and then ask the rabbi to respond in view of the lateness of the hour in order to give our audience an opportunity to ask questions. Rabbi, I think it would be helpful if you try to keep your responses relatively short, because I think you've pretty well expanded on anything that we probably would want to know at this point. So I'll ask Tad initially whether you have any question or rebuttal or any statement you want to make to the rabbi, and then we'll go from there.
I speak with a lot of my friends who haven't got the same relationship with God as you do, or as I do, or in some cases really don't have a relationship with God, and their Judaism isn't connected to that way. And they're interdating, and I say to them, look, you shouldn't interdate for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, and their response is, yes, so what? Why should I, as an individual, care? I know it's not good for the community, but why should it doesn't hurt me so much? I'm not losing this relationship because I don't have it anyway. Why should I care?
That's exactly what I said. That was exactly my point. There's no reason I shouldn't care. And to answer him, you're harming the community, that's the wrong approach, the wrong answer.
An answer, though?
He's harming himself, but he doesn't understand that he's harming himself. And therefore the obligation is to make him aware of what Jewishness is all about, to talk to him about theological principles and Jewish survival and all that. If he, like you said, he doesn't know what these things mean. They're literally, you may as well talk to him in a different language. And before you can use terminology like that, you would first have to explain to him, what does it mean for him to be Jewish? And you can't just lay down the law and say to him, look here, you are Jewish, therefore you're not allowed to do that. I don't know what you're talking about. So you would have to explain to him in terms, okay, let's discuss who are you, what are you, where do you come from, what are you all about, what is your identity? Why are you regarded as a Jew? Whether you regard yourself as a Jew or you're just regarded by others as a Jew, try and explain that to him. You have to start from olive base. You can't come in the middle, because it's the same as, that's why I couldn't answer all your questions just like that. It's how going to the olive base of what is the whole matrix on which you're talking about. So that was exactly my point. There's no reason why this person should not intermarry, nor is there any reason why his assimilated parents should object to his intermarrying. Thank God they do. In spite of themselves, not because of themselves. That's again God's miraculous way of keeping us alive. As I say, it's God's way whether we survive or not. And God will just have to do something about it. But you cannot come and reason with them unless you have something to appeal to. But you have to give them some content. The problem is most people is they have no content. And that's where we have to start. So we usually come to them, like I said, 12 years, 9 months too late. But we also look at it, it's never too late. And even if they're already involved in a relationship, you can still try and imbue them with a sense of Jewish identity. And that is our obligation. That's hopefully the way that we can salvage this.
Dr. Angel, do you have a follow-up question?
I shouldn't, really. I'm very eager to hear questions from the audience, so I'll be extremely brief. I'll really cut my 3-hour response down to about 10 seconds or something. But so I'm going to focus just on one simple point. The rabbi took some time to apparently agree with me that the passage on which the law, the halakha, the child of a Jewish woman is Jewish, and the child of a non-Jewish, of a Jewish woman is Jewish, and the child of a Jewish father with a non-Jewish mother is not Jewish, is not explicit in the Torah. So we agree. It's not explicit in the Torah. That means it needs interpretation. Now, there are umpteen examples of interpretation, rabbinic discussion, pilpul, and many difficult kinds of things. And also our tradition is, as Rabbi David Hartman calls it, a living covenant. We have examples in which what you would call ordinary explicit pshat Torah law is actually overturned by a rabbinic takana. So you have a case where it's very clear that in the biblical period, a man could marry many wives. This was fine. Not only was it fine to marry many wives, it's actually a mitzvah in a certain case. In the case where a man has a brother who dies childless, and the man is already married, then he has a mitzvah of taking the widow as a wife. So that makes him have several wives. And it's a mitzvah. Of course, he has the privilege or the right to refuse it. But along, of course, as many people here know, obviously the rabbi knows, the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom forbids the fulfillment of this mitzvah because we are not allowed to take several wives. So we have cases, this is just one example of a takana. Rabbeinu Gershom lived 1,000 years ago, but there are takanot right into the 20th century on all kinds of matters of family law and status, and when marriages can take place and so on. And so clearly we have a tradition in which we praise our rabbis for being able to evolve and to interpret the Torah in creative ways according to the evolving consciousness of the civilization. So it's not simply a case, even if it were absolutely explicit in the Torah, as clear as these things can be, although I agree there's a dimension of non-explicitness no matter what. But even when it seems very explicit like this mitzvah, it can nevertheless be changed. But here, in this particular case of patrilineal descent, we do not have an explicit, what we would normally in ordinary parlance call a clear Torah law on the subject. We have it through a complicated inference, which everybody can look up and see that it is complicated, and open to many other interpretations. So my original question stands.
My original answer stands.
Good.
If you have, like I said, the example of circumcision. It's a complicated interpretation, the same as the so-called complicated. To me, it's not complicated at all. The way the Mishnah enumerates that in Kiddushin, it's very self-explicit and very clear that it's the only logical interpretation of the text. And the way it is derived is certainly not more complex than we derive that circumcision. It means cutting off the foreskin of the penis, which is even further removed from Pshat than you have about the matrilineal lineage. And the way you have to interpret about Shabbat and Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, etc., etc. Now, either you accept his tradition as authoritative or you don't. To start picking and choosing, well, this part, yes, this is, to me, is simple and straightforward, that's okay. That one, I think, is a bit complex and we have to adapt it. And that is not okay to me. That's playing games. You can't pick and choose. It's all or nothing. As far as the takanot are concerned, isn't it interesting that all these takanot are takanot of restrictions, not of permitting things which are forbidden by the Bible. And isn't it interesting that the same movements who always appeal to this concept of takanot, all the takanot that they have instituted are all to make things easier, to permit the forbidden. Where throughout rabbinic tradition will you ever find, Talmudic tradition or later medieval tradition, including the Cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom and later on, that they ever permitted something which was forbidden? They always forbade that which is initially permissible. So if I want to accept additional restrictions upon myself, I have this option. Even with regards that you say about elaborate marriage, the Torah itself gives you there two options. Either marry your sister-in-law, or there has to be the process of what is called chalitza. Now, when they said today no more yibum, only chalitza, that is not countermanding or circumventing the Torah law. On the contrary, it's simply picking on only one of these options given, and for good reasons, namely that most people who came to observe this did not do so for the right reasons. So therefore, let's avoid certain problems which may arise, which may lead to much more serious violations of the Torah, and therefore have just chalitza and no more yibum. So that is to preserve the Torah and not to do something against it. In terms of restrictions, if you don't want to eat meat, you want to be a vegetarian, you're not violating anything in the Torah. But all, like I said before, all these movements as reform, conservative, construction, whatever you have, when they keep appealing to all these takanot of once upon a time, or even nowadays, isn't it interesting? There's not one single takana that any of these movements ever instituted that was to restrict, to forbid, to make things harder, But everything they did, no, this you don't longer have to do, this no longer you have to do, kashrut is only because they have no fridges in the desert, this and that is because of this, and this and that is because of that, so therefore no longer applies. So therefore I don't understand how you can still stand by your question.
I think we'll call that one a draw until the Court of Appeal decides otherwise. Okay, we'll go on to the next question, the next panelist, and that's
some kind of inconsistency or difficulty with two major points that you made. One is, if you see Judaism strictly as a faith and a religion, and we give, perhaps, say, Jewish status only to those who are totally a halachic person.
No, I never said that.
Well, but...
Only those which halacha stipulates are Jewish.
Well, no, let me finish. It's true that we give Jewish status, those are halachically Jewish, meaning born of a Jewish mother. That's one way of having entry as membership into the Jewish fold. But if we were to see it purely as a faith and a religion, why could we, then the logic would be to say, just like I want to be Catholic or Muslim, I will take on all the halacha, I will live that way, and only those people will be purely Jewish. And so what happens then is about 3/4 of the Jewish world would really be eliminated, because what percentage really are that kind of totally halachic person? So either you have entry into the peoplehood through a bloodline, or you have it only in terms of identifying and saying the people who are really Jewish are only those who are totally halal.
As I said earlier, the Torah and the Torah alone is the one who defines Jewish identity. It is the Torah which defines that a Jew is A, the one born of a Jewish mother. I don't care who he is, what he does or what he doesn't do. Once you have that, that's it. If I were to make Torah my laws, perhaps I might be more strict. I would say, hey, that doesn't make sense on my level, on the human level. You can't just have any Tom, Dick, and Harry. They're doing everything goes counter to it, etc. Well, God is the one who defines it. That's number one. Then the Torah says, be the one who converts to Judaism. And conversion to Judaism implies that I have, like I said earlier, have seen here in this religion truth. And I'm prepared to accept that truth. There's no way you can say that I have found and discovered truth in this religion without accepting what that religion states. If I'm born a Jew, whether I still see the truth or do not see the truth becomes irrelevant. I'm born a Canadian, whether I appreciate my Canadian citizenship, whether I appreciate the benefits I have from Canadian citizenship or not, doesn't really matter. I have my Canadian passport. Nobody can take it away from me. If I become a naturalized citizen, however, I have to appreciate what this means. And I have to pledge allegiance to abide by the laws and the constitution of the country. I have to find out what it's all about. So I have, in a way, to prove myself. A born Canadian can commit certain crimes, they'll lock him up in jail, then let him free, and that's it. A naturalized citizen can be thrown out of the country. Citizenship can be revoked. So this is exactly how Torah looks at it as well. So if I become a convert, the demands of becoming included in that, the entry exam, is different than for the one who is born. Once he has become a full-fledged Jew, legitimate conversion, then the children, they're off the hook. So these are the rules. These are the rules of the game. If they may appeal to me, if they make sense to me on my human level or not, the same as I can talk about the red heifer, I can talk about the dietary laws. Whether it makes sense to me, whether it appeals to me or does not appeal to me, it becomes irrelevant. Either I believe in the Torah or I do not believe in the Torah. Either I believe in halacha or I do not believe in halacha. Once I accept the criteria of halacha, this is it. It's all or nothing. And you can't pick and choose.
okay. And finally, Andrew, do you have a follow-up question?
Not a question. Don't want to yell at me again.
Didn't yell at you. I didn't yell at you. I yelled at the principal, not at you.
You're probably a Toronto Blue Jays fan, both Orioles fans. We'll agree to disagree tonight. I'm not a citizen, but I'm a resident here in Canada, of this beautiful country, and but I still follow the laws of this beautiful country and enjoy being here. And the Canadian, just as Canadian Constitution changes and evolves because of the needs of the society, I think it's important to continue to follow that as a model.
Constitutions are made social contract for people according to the needs of the people. That's how a constitution is made in the first place. And as the times change, there's not a single country that still has the same laws as they had 50 years ago. You see laws changing in your own time. The laws in Vancouver are not the same laws as probably in Richmond. And which are certainly not the same laws, even municipal laws, as we have in Toronto. The federal laws are the same everywhere. Provincial laws are not the same. Municipal laws within the same province are not the same. Each society, as it forms its own society, forms its own social contract, and says these are the kinds of things that we want. And as the social fabric changes, so will the laws change. Here we're not talking about social contract. Here we're not talking about an agreement. Here we're not talking about what serves our purposes. Here we're talking about absolutes. Here we're talking about moral principles that God says, this is what I expect of you. And when you speak about Torah and you speak about Revelation, we're not talking about anything that relates to any particular time or any particular place. In fact, this is where the Torah keeps emphasizing that the Torah was given specifically, purposely, in a desert, a wasteland. The most difficult place where you can live and survive. To teach you that even in a wasteland, not only in a city like Toronto, where you have every form of Jewish education that you can imagine, from right-wing extreme all the way to left-wing extreme, every type of kashrut that you could possibly dream about, every form of everything that you could possibly ask for. To live in Toronto as a nice religious Jew, very easy. Vancouver is a bit harder. Thank God you have pretty much everything as well. Then you have all the little hick towns, where it's very hard. You have a desert, that's practically impossible. Practically, but not necessarily so. Comes to Torah and says, Torah applies everywhere, even in a desert, anytime. Torah is not something which was given 3,500 years ago because of the conditions of time. Yes, if God is eternal, if God transcends time and space, then so does His will, and so does His wisdom, and so does the dictates of the Torah that He gave. And that is the very foundation of the Torah. This is the very foundation of halacha. Once you tackle that, you may as well throw it all out. You may as well throw out the baby as the bathwater, because I don't even know the distinction anymore between the baby and the bathwater. Which parts are important, which parts are not important. Which parts are significant, which are not significant. To each generation, something else. You are always influenced by the environment. You're always influenced by the spirit of the time. And take abortion, take capital punishment. The pendulum will swing. 30 years ago, abortion out of the question. Capital punishment, definitely. Then the pendulum swung all the way to the other side. Now there are many places where it's swinging back. And so it goes back and forth, depending on the mentality, and the outlook, and the perspective that people have. But that is no longer morality then. That is simply, what do we as members of this group want here and now? When you speak about religion, this has nothing to do with it. In terms of religion, you're speaking about values, morality, ethics, in an absolute sense, not in a relative sense, not in a situational sense.
Thank you. That brings to an end the formal part of our evening. Now, but don't leave yet. But now we're going to open the floor for questions from the audience. It's been rather a lengthy evening, so I have a couple of requests. Number one, try and keep your questions short. Number two,
The answer's short.
keep the answer short. Number two, we don't mind a bit of a preamble, but there should be a question. At the end of the sentence, there should be a question, not just a statement. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask and direct the question to who you wish the answer to, who we wish it answered by. And the final thing is there are microphones in the audience. This is being taped, so I think for posterity's sake, we would ask that you address the question through the microphone so all of us can hear. So
And remember, I have a 7:15 plane to catch tomorrow morning.
So please feel free to ask questions of the rabbi or any of the panelists. Don't bother asking me any questions, because I'm not supposed to have any opinion. Go ahead.
Is it on?
Yes.
Here's my preamble. While I agree with much of what you said regarding what determines Jewish identity, I fundamentally believe that what determines Jewish identity, what's essential for Judaism, flows through Torah and mitzvot. I disagree with the way you phrased it in a way that made the questions that were brought up here moot. And I would like to give a few examples where I disagree with you and then pose a question specifically on the issue of intermarriage and conversion. You said that there is no morality that can be intuited by human beings. Morality can only come from God. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, in an article he wrote about ethics, quotes the verse from Breshit that Abraham Avinu says to Kadosh Baruch Hu, "Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat." Can the one who judges the entire universe not do that which is just? So the question is, if justice only comes from God, or morality only comes from God, how could Abraham Avinu have asked that question? I have just a few more points, so I'll say them quickly. One other is that we have a concept called minhag Torahi, that how the Jewish people behaves can take on the status of Torah. Chazal say that explicitly, the word Torah. So the example I might give is, you said that what people eat is not important. I might challenge that in the sense that our sages felt it important enough to include, for instance, the minhag of eating milchiks on Shavuos in the Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah brings that halakha there. So I would say the Ramah felt it important enough that what people did eat does take on an importance in Judaism. Lastly, the point you brought up about converting someone who was converting for reasons other than that they had seen the truth of Judaism. There is a Gemara that I'm sure you're familiar with. I know that I'm not saying anything that you don't know, and it's b'mechilat kavod that I ask you these questions. Right, with Hillel who converted a non-Jew who asked to be converted on the condition that he be made the Kohen Gadol, and the Tosfot there comment that Hillel Hazaken knew that at some point this convert would eventually convert l'shem shamayim. But later sages deduce based on that there is a certain flexibility that the Beit Din has. And based on that, some of our Achronim have concluded that Jewish continuity might be an issue that the Beit Din should consider when dealing with conversion, and not only seeing the truth of Judaism. And I'm referring to Rav David Tzvi Hoffman and the Mishpatei Uziel, who was the Sephardi chief rabbi of Israel. So I would what? I'm sorry?
Saying what?
Saying that Jewish continuity, the words that I believe the Mishpatei Uziel uses is Zera Yisrael, that we need be concerned for the seed of Israel, and that may be a reason to discuss these issues, that Jewish continuity is an issue that needs to be discussed. And although I agree with you, I don't mean to argue your main point. I think that what you're saying, I agree with much of what you're saying, that what we ideally look for is someone who's converting for the reason that they see the truth and the beauty of the Jewish religion. At the same time, our scholars, our sages, have brought into the picture the question of Jewish continuity.
That's it? That's the question.
The question is, besides how you would respond to that, how do you disregard the these positions?
Okay. First of all, your question about intuitive morality. If I would have more time, I would even show you that halachically there's no such thing. Look at the halacha in Maimonides and Hilchos Melachim about the Noachite who observes the Noachite code, and does so out of his own intuition, out of seeing the wisdom of the self-evident wisdom of what he's doing. Says Maimonides, that person is loy mechasidei umas olam. He's not of the pious of the nations. And according to a certain version also, loy mechachmei, not even of the wise. He does not get any credit whatsoever for observing the Noahide code, unless he observes it strictly as revealed by God in the Torah. Then he is Chasid umas olam. Which means that because simply doing things because of the intrinsic rational value, practical value, social contract, utilitarianism, pragmatism, is of no moral or religious significance. It is of practical significance. And that's why nations throughout the world have adopted basic civil law. If you look at the Code of Hammurabi, and you look at Parshas Mishpatim, you'll see how much they coincide. Because it's common sense. The Torah calls them common sense laws. The Torah says these laws did not have to be written in the Torah. We would have devised them on our own. But by the same token, the Torah also says, if you devise them on your own and follow them on your own, they are no longer moral principles. They become practical principles. And insofar that I do these things because they're prescribed by the Torah, ve'ele hamishpotim asher tosim b'fneim, ma'elu misinai af elu misinai, now they become moral principles for me. And the same applies to the Noahide code. What happened with Abraham did not argue that they have intuitive morality. Abraham argued with God, no question God does justice. But, and here our chairman can invoke, is to say something, justice not only has to be done, it also has to be perceived to be done. And that was Abraham's argument. Abraham argued with God that if you are going to just nilly-willy destroy these cities, this is going to be a chilul Hashem. People are going to say there is no justice in this world. You can't tell me that in these cities you cannot find some good people? Come on, give me a break. Big cities like that, metropolitan areas. So his whole argument was, it's a chilul Hashem. HaShofet kol ha'oretz lo ya'aseh mishpat, the judge of the whole universe is not going to act justly. And the same argument was used by Moses later on. Again, justice will not be perceived to be done. And Abraham was concerned, Moses was concerned, that the world should come to the recognition of God's presence. And therefore do not provide the world with excuses that things are happening arbitrarily. The same people go around asking, why do bad things happen to good people? Why did God allow the Holocaust? That was Abraham's argument. That was Moses' argument. So this has nothing to do with intuitive morality, having intuitive moral principles of what is right and what is wrong. That we don't have. And every philosopher will admit to that. Unless they would go into saying, subjective or relative or situational ethics is also ethics. Which of course, as we talked earlier, doesn't exist. That's why every philosopher, from the pre-Socratics down to our day, has been trying to find some way to show that, yes, you can come up with universal, absolute principles of moral behavior. But they have failed. And they will continue to fail. Because there's no way I can find from within my finite existence, subject to time and space, something which transcends time and space. As for the next point, minhag. Yes, minhag is all customs, same as in secular law. You have social conventions. For example, legal cases about pornography are judged in terms of what is the social perception, of what is socially acceptable, what is not socially acceptable. And it's so far that certain things are within the confines of Jewish law, and they have been adopted, and it doesn't violate anything or touch upon anything, yes, then this becomes Minhag Yisrael Torah. If it touches in any sense whatsoever anything of Jewish law, practice, or perception, or attitude, and so forth, then, as Rabbi Tam says, the word minhag, the letters of the word minhag, are the same letters that spell the word Gehenna. That those are outrooted and uprooted. They have no place in Jewish law and Jewish practice. It's not every minhag. It's not the way people think, any minhag. Yes, that's our minhag. That's nonsense. That's amaratzis. Minhagim is only those that apply to certain reasons, that have a certain foundation, and that have become adopted in the course of time. Then they become, that assumes the force of social law, and according to which we have to conduct ourselves. With regards to the proselytes Hillel, as you already alluded yourself, the Talmud, all it tells us is that is what I thought you were referring to another thing about conversion. That was in your Romans, what you're referring to is in Shabbos. Those particular stories do not, all they say is just in a nutshell. Convert me while standing on one leg. Convert me with this. Convert me by making me a high priest, etc., etc. And then later they became. It does not say what happened there. All it says are Hillel had patience, and this person is interested in something, he wants to know something, okay, I'll sit down and study. What happened in the process before the conversion actually happened, that the Talmud does not discuss. It only wanted to give you the moral with regards to the reaction of Shammai, with regards to the reaction of Hillel. And here, incidentally, is another misconception that people have, a total distortion of reality. Shammai is always regarded the tough one, the ruffian. Hillel, the kind, the compassionate one. Sheer nonsense. There are literally dozens of halachot where the roles are exactly reversed. And it's Shammai who says, accept every person, every human being, not talking about every Jew, but every human being with a kind, with kindness, with showing a nice face, with a smile, etc., etc. So this perception that comes in there, the difference between Hillel and Shammai, is a total distortion which is based on ignorance of simply looking even in the Mishnah. In Noholois and in Edius, there's a whole string of Mishnayot, where Shammai is Mekel and Hillel is Machmir. So, because they had certain principles of interpretation that they followed, which sometimes led them to this conclusion, and sometimes led to that conclusion. But it does not mean, as a matter of fact, because this is halacha, laid down in the Talmud, brought down for that matter, based on the Chumash itself, that there are these requirements of accepting Torah. That's why the Jewish people did not become a Jewish people until the Matan Torah. And as Rashi elaborated in last week's parasha, Parashas Mishpatim. They went through conversion, they went through the circumcision, they went through the sacrifice, and Kabbalas HaMitzvahs. And without that, there is no conversion. And Kabbalas HaMitzvahs, that is really at the root of it. What happens when the so-called convert has tricked the best in saying, I will accept, I thought that's the Gemara you're going to refer to in your bonus. So there, okay, once they're tricked, then that's it. So it's very hard to negate something unless it's immediately thereafter. But initially, these are preconditions which cannot be surmounted.
Okay, Rabbi, just before the next questioner comes on, try to make the question just a tad shorter, and maybe the answer just a tad shorter, so we can get all the questions in. It's 10:20 right now, and I'm sure we don't want to be here for the midnight show.
I'll be very brief. Rabbi Schochet, I've enjoyed listening to you talk very much, and I know you've covered this slightly already, or actually more than slightly, but I wonder if you could offer some specific points, some take-home messages for us as to what to tell a sibling or a cousin or someone you know close to you who is either thinking of intermarrying or dating a Gentile. I'm wondering if you could help some of us out here who might be in that situation, even though I know you have mentioned that, you can't give us all the answers, and there maybe aren't all the answers. I wonder if you could help us out.
In the way I told you before, I have no answer. You have to deal literally with each case on its own. It's when I see 10 people who are all sneezing and coughing, and I take one of them and I examine him and I prescribe penicillin for him. That does not mean that the others can now also say, let's take the same penicillin. For all you know, they may be allergic to it. So it's not only not going to cure them, but it's going to be fatal for them. You have to deal with each case knowing who you are dealing with. What would appeal to that person? Where do you have an entry to that person's mind, or more than that, to the person's heart, that you can really build a case why they shouldn't. With some it's on the rational level, with some it's on the emotional level, with some it's depending on, like in the story I told you about this father and the son going to India. I need something to latch on to, and I need to know something about the person before I can answer you. With some, a very strict attitude will work. With others, it will boomerang. With some, you just keep appealing to the emotion. Look, you're going to destroy the family, your parents, they're going to be upset, etc. So do it at least for their sake. With some, it will work. There are plenty of cases that this does work. Others, again, will shrug their shoulders and say no. Then we come back to the gentleman's question. They don't know the first thing, why should I object? Well, what is wrong? You can't just throw it at them out of the blue. If they really see no offhand logical objection to interdating and intermarriage. Interdating would still be the easiest, because there it's before the horse is out of the barn. You can say, look here, what this is going to lead to, and emphasize the dangers of the problems of intermarriage, and then why open yourself up? You take little children, infants, just weeks old, and take them to the doctor, and expose them to getting injections, which have bad reactions. Ask any mother here. Nights and nights they were up, the baby crying. For what? For the inoculations. Why do you inoculate them? What are the chances today of getting whooping cough and diphtheria and what have you? Very, very minimal. And yet we don't want to take chances. So we inoculate them from the earliest age possible. If we do that on the physical level, why not try to inoculate our children on the other one? But again, sometimes we didn't. And then we have to deal with the problem as it comes. The whole problem, and some may be offended by what I'm going to say, but this is what I've often compared this to. I compare it to AIDS. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Talking on the spiritual level. We have a natural immune system for Jewish identity. And then we acquire an immune deficiency syndrome because of the way that we have raised our children, the way we conduct our communities, etc., etc. Now, does that mean that now once, God forbid, there is this case of AIDS, I just ignore him? Obviously not. I have to look for a cure, and at the same time I have to treat the person who is involved. I may, even if I could just extend their life, I may not necessarily save it, but I may save it also while I can. Compare it to physical disease. In every physical disease, whatever it may be, you look at this individually and have to treat it. Now I know I've not really answered the question, but that's really the best I can come up with. And then go to people in your community who have expertise, who know how to help, because not you are emotionally involved and it happens in your own family. And once you get your emotions involved, sometimes you may say things which you later regret that you said, or react in a way that simply made it sound ridiculous. Get somebody who is not so directly emotionally involved, and to either help or speak with the person. And it's not going to go overnight. It doesn't go snap, bingo, you snap out of it. But that's the best that I can possibly tell you. Each case is really a totally individual case. It has to be dealt with on such a level to try and find where can I zero in some way, shape or manner that will appeal to something in the person's mind or heart or feelings or what have you that I can build on and develop that.
Okay, I don't know if any of our panelists wish to comment on that or carry on. Next question, please.
Okay. I'm 50 years old. I believe that gives me the wisdom to at least be able to give counsel, even if I'm standing up here as an ignoramus. I think I'd probably rather be an apicorus, but I'm not sure that I am. But I'm going to speak from my kishkas just as you did. And I need to say that from the underlying kind of values that come out of all this for me, and I'm going to be really, really honest. For me, it feels like a real chutzpah. I'm talking about me. As a person who's not absolute and who isn't infinite, to really be able to know and to be able to conceive all of Revelation. In other words, to be able to say, this is what Hashem means for us at all time. This is the halakha for all time. I just have to say this because this is what's absolutely honest for me. And even through a lifetime of study of absolutely every text that I could ever get hands on, I'm not sure that I would ever want to be able to stand in front of somebody and say, I believe that I have the whole truth. I go back to the metaphor of the elephant and the blind person. I feel like the blind person. I live here and now. I have certain pieces of Torah and, Torah in the wider sense that I can understand. But I still feel that I'm grasping at little bits of the truth at a time, and that each of the pieces of the elephant are revealed to us at different times. I think that the very machloket between Hillel and Shammai were that they each had a grasp on different pieces of truth. And I can only come back to pieces of Torah that I really wrestle with, and I think that we've tried to live with, not die for. I think of the piece of Torah that says, if you have a 13, I'm going to get this a little bit inaccurate, but if you have a 13-year-old son or child, and this person is rebellious, you shall stone him. Well, we don't do that because we just have not the ability to really kind of, grasp this whole truth. So we find ways to live with this. And I'm just putting myself forward as a person who really feels that for me to come forward, or anybody to come forward and say, this is the absolute word of God's halakha, that we know it for all times, to me I feel really overwhelmed by that. I just can't accept that. And my question is, do you agree at all with what I'm saying?
Let me first of all put a slight correction in there. There's nowhere in the Torah that says it's the 15-year-old. It's not even 13 years old. Back to the non-explicit text, the way it is interpreted, it's in such a way that this never happened and never will happen. that it's practically impossible to happen. Because it's only a very small stage, just before the 13th birthday, that this would be able to be possible in terms of age of the child and in terms of the parents. They would both have to be identical in every respect in terms of voice, hearing, speech, etc., etc. The Talmud goes into that, and therefore the Talmud comes to the conclusion that Ben Sarah lo hoyo v'lo nivo. It never was and never can be. It's because it's practically impossible to this. Then why is this principle in the Torah? Drosh v'kabel schar. Studied because there are certain underlying moral principles involved instead, which remain. So the law is a law. If it should happen, which is a purely theoretical case, which is impossible to ever happen. And secondly, that so insofar you know this, and secondly, you can derive from that a whole number of moral lessons from it. Now, do I agree with your basic thesis? Obviously, no. And it's not just that I do not agree with that. It's not a question of this being arrogant or presumptuous in saying that I have the truth. Any person who claims to be religious must claim that he has the truth. Otherwise, he has no business belonging to that religion. I have no business belonging there. If I belong to this means I believe that this is the way I have to live. This is my faith. This is my commitment. This is my religion. And I believe that this comes from God. I expect a Christian to say that about his faith. I expect a Muslim to say that about his faith. If they don't say that, they have no business identifying as to whatever they are. Now, what does that mean? I have the truth. I have the truth insofar that I have the Torah. That I know historically and rationally that the Torah is, Shemaim is divinely revealed, etc., etc. Now, do I understand everything in the Torah correctly? Perhaps not. But is there such a thing as an absolute, definite interpretation of it? If it wouldn't be, then the Torah, like I said earlier, would be a meaningless joke. That if there would not be this old tradition that we have and that explicates the written tradition, the Torah is a meaningless book, then God may as well not have given it. He may as well not have said anything. Insofar that we believe that there is religion and there is a man-God and God-man relationship, then obviously God must tell me what to do. If not, it's a farce. God expects me to do this, and then God to say, well, as long as you have the right intentions and the goodwill, well, the road to heaven is paved with good intentions. I can go to, with all the good intentions in the middle of the night, wake up to take my medication, very rough for me to get up, and go in the darkness to the medicine cabinet and take out the medication and swallow it. Guess what? I took the wrong one. All the good intentions were there, but you still took the fatal medicine. So good intentions and meaning well and following your conscience and following your heart, etc., etc. It sounds nice, and it's pop psychology that we keep getting right, left, and center all over the place all the time, but it's sheer meaningless nonsense. Unfortunately, we live in an age where thinking is regarded as a bad habit. And the place I see that at worst is at college, at university. Students couldn't care less. Just tell me how the fastest way to get my credit. What text do I have to study, what test do I have to write. Being that comes before testing time. Comes testing time, regurgitate it. The more you can regurgitate what the teacher said, the higher mark you get. And at the end of the semester, you walk out just as ignorant as when you walked in. As a matter of fact, you walk out much more ignorant, because now you think you know something. And that is where religion comes in. That's where religion comes in and tells you, look here, I have to give you explicit guidelines. Now, if it sounds presumptuous, too bad. But that is what religion means by definition. And if I don't believe that, there's no religion. Then why identify as a Jew? Why even speak? Why look for the little pieces of the elephant? Who says there's an elephant there in the first place? And who says you got a piece of the elephant? Maybe you caught a fly that's sitting on the back of the elephant. So if these are possibilities, then you're groping in the dark, you're not getting anywhere. There may as well not be a Torahist. There may as well not be any Judaism. So then what am I identifying by? So no, yes, so be it. Let it be. Yes, we do have truth. And that is the truth. Moshe emes and Torah emes. Moses is doing this, Torah is doing, and this is what is foundation.
Quick question, and it's not facetious. If I understand what you said correctly, you're almost saying that by definition there are very few or no heretics because the level of knowledge and intelligence is such that there really aren't that many of them around. Isn't it equally true then that a religious Jew, as you are defining it, there will be an equally small number?
What? A small number?
Equally small number, by definition?
Yes, all it could be. But the point is, in talking about the heretic, he would have to really first study everything that is Judaism. I have not come across a person that has done so and then gone around to deny it. In the last century, you had some of these people. The early Maskilim, the Haskalah movement, they were all yeshiva graduates. And then they were enthused by the Industrial Revolution, with all these new social philosophies that came about in the 19th century, etc., 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 and they threw it aside. Now, once you know the truth, you see the truth, and you deny it, for whatever reason, and even then I wouldn't necessarily call them Epicurus. Because if they would really think consistently, there's no way they could have denied it. So then you come and you start building all kinds of straw men in your own head. Religion is not, see, people make a big mistake about religion. Two mistakes, on two extremes of the subject, two sides of the coin. Some people adopt religion, hey, just have faith, baby. The rabbi told you to do so, your mommy told you to do so, your teacher, Rabbi told you to do so, just do it because you were told to do so. Or the minister on the street corner preacher tells you to do so. People who accept religion and follow religion on that basis are reducing religion to the least significant and most meaningless thing in the world. You wouldn't buy a can of pop that way, just because somebody said so. And yet when it comes to salvation, soul, ultimate reality, ultimate truth, you're prepared to simply accept what somebody says. Then comes somebody else on the other side of the coin. Says, I'll accept your religion if you prove it to me beyond the shadow of a doubt. That's just as stupid. Because there is no such thing as proving it beyond the shadow of a doubt. It does not exist. You find me any person who's an expert in the field that I never heard about. Never heard about. I don't even understand his terminology, his vocabulary. I promise you, at most, in 5 minutes, I'll draw circles around him proving he doesn't know what he's talking about. But I know nothing about the subject. Guaranteed, I give you that in writing. There's no such thing. In science, there's no such thing as absolute proof. What you do have is laws of probability. There's no proof that this building is not going to cave in within the next 5 seconds. And yet I don't see anybody sitting here worried about it. And you all know and recognize and accept the truth of that possibility. But what is the probability? Practically nil. So therefore, don't ask for religion more than you ask for other things on which you literally stake your life. You go into elevators, you go into airplanes, you go into this and that. I say religion has to be treated like everything else in life. No less, no more. And once you treat it exactly the same criteria as everything else in life, I don't care where you come from, I don't care what your epistemological criteria are, then I say if you're a Jew, you're stuck with Sinai, and you're stuck with Torah, and you're stuck with Halakha. And there's no way that you can rationally build your way out of it. Unless you play my case. Unless you adopt a double standard. So therefore I would even say, even 100 years ago, there were no articles. If a person can talk himself into anything, and imagine anything that this doesn't make sense, and this doesn't make sense, etc. If that person would consistently sit down and judge it by the same criteria that he judges how do you go into a car and then elevator into an airplane, I promise you, there's no way he can wheedle his way out of the revelation side. If he tells me about any event in history that he accepts, whether Second World War, First World War, or Columbus or Alexander the Great, I don't care why you accept anything of history, and anything that happened 5 seconds ago is history, and there's no difference between 5 seconds ago and 5,000 years ago. Past is past, history is history. Whatever criteria you use for your historiography, I'll show you that the same applies to Sinai. Are there people who deny it? Yes, of course, there are people who deny it. The same as you have 30, 40, 50 years, and not just today, but 30 years after the Holocaust, with Holocaust survivors from Auschwitz, and from Bergen-Belsen, and from Birkenau, and from Buchenwald, still walking around with the numbers tattooed in there, denying the Holocaust is a hoax. And these are not a bunch of dumbbells somewhere in the gutter of the street. We are talking about academics. People like those who teach Jewish studies at universities. Academics. Scholars. Historians of world repute. Holocaust, give me a break, it's impossible. 6 million Jews in 5 years' time? Come on, give me a break. That's only counting the Jews. That's not counting the millions and millions of the others. It's impossible. The German records are there. The survivors are there. The soldiers who came to the camps are here. They're still alive. And it's a plot. It's a plot. Now, some of these people really mean it. They really mean it. And frankly, if I wouldn't know that it is true, from what I regard as evidence, to me it is inconceivable as well. To me it's logically inconceivable. You mean a civilized nation, a cultured nation like Germany, on top of the world in the most advanced in culture in every field, science, philosophy, music, literature, you name it, from the middle of the 18th century on. Germany was the top nation on that. They are going to do something like that, which animals in the jungle don't do? Impossible. Impossible. But the reality is still there. So people deny it, yes, people deny it. And they are sincere in their denial. But that doesn't make them any less fools. So they're not because they're just simply fools, idiots. At worst, they're being inconsistent. That is where their dishonesty comes in. They're not judging the Holocaust the same as they judge all these events. And that's what I say with regards to Torah, that's what I say with regards to Revelation, that's what I say with regards to these things at all. So therefore, I'm afraid of no. Frankly, I cannot conceive of a logical possibility of a two occurs.
We have one more question. This will be our last question.
Very quick question. Rabbi, before you believe somebody who wants to convert, do they have to become a scholar? It sounds like they have to know a lot about Judaism before you take them seriously. What happens?
No. He may have seen things about Judaism, studied things about Judaism, heard things about Judaism, and he's somehow turned on by that and sincerely feels, this is the truth. Then I tell him, sit down and study. Don't just take the philosophical aspects of Judaism, because that's secondary. The philosophical aspects of Judaism you cannot even understand without the practical aspects of Judaism. There's no way anybody can you imagine me going over to a non-observant Jew and telling him, okay, you have to observe Shabbat. Okay, sure, Rabbi, what do you want me to do? I'll give him a list. What does Shabbat entail? Shabbat entails on the positive side, basically just one thing, make Kiddush. Hey, that's great. Another glass of wine, why not? But that's just one mitzvah. Remember the Shabbos, make Kiddush now. Then comes the negative. And if you take Code of Jewish Law as a section that thick, just dealing with the laws of Shabbat. And it's basically don't, and don't. You have to be nuts and insane to want to become a Jew. And that's indeed what every rabbi is supposed to say to every prospective convert. Are you mad? Don't you have enough headaches already? Why would you want to put on a straitjacket and become a Jew? You're hungry? Go to McDonald's, go to Wendy's. Become a Jew? Then you have to go start in a kosher restaurant. And it's not only sure, you can find them also, but you're going to pay 4 times, 5 times as much. And it tastes half as bad. Sorry, twice as bad, half as good, etc., etc. You're asking for trouble. I have to discourage him and show him, look here what an onus it is. It is a straitjacket. If I were to explain to anybody, even a Jew, about Shabbat, he would have to be insane to accept it. So what do I do instead? I invite him for Shabbat. I don't say anything about Shabbat. Just come to my house on Friday night, look at Shabbat afternoon. He comes to my house, in the middle of the dinner, and talking, singing the telephone lines. I don't know what the telephone. He's wondering, maybe I'm half deaf or whatever. But he doesn't want to be rude, so he sees I can walk. Then he keeps looking at his watch. What do you have here? The Canucks? Huh? Cooper, who would you have here? The Canucks. Compared to Maple Leafs, it's nothing. So he looks at his watch. Hey, it's hockey game on tonight. Now we have basketball games. I think you have the Grizzlies, yeah. Nothing compared to the Raptors. But anyway, so he looks at that. Hey, how long is he going to keep dragging it out? I don't want to miss the game. Okay, goes fine. It wasn't bad. It's just funny. He didn't want to pick up the telephone. He didn't turn on the television. Didn't listen to the comes back the next time, and something similar happens. But now he already knows what he expects. He's a funny people. The third time, he doesn't even notice it anymore. The fourth time he takes it for granted. Not just that I don't do it, but all of a sudden he has made a new discovery. Guess what? You're not a slave. You're a free person. You don't have to run every time the phone rings. Whether it's the phone on your wall or the cellular phone. You can just ignore it. You do not have to go and run whenever the game starts and be the slave to whatever time schedule you may have. You can be your own person and set your own schedule and lead your own life. And then all of a sudden he starts absorbing the spirituality. The negative things, the older don'ts, they come off themselves without even noticing that you're doing them or that you're avoiding them. It's no hassle anymore. And that is again where education becomes so important. When a child is raised from early child, people say, why don't you give him a religious education once he comes of age? Let him choose that for himself. Yeah, he can choose for himself. But then, hey, it's a hassle. Once a child is raised from early childhood on, doing this, not doing this, etc., etc. If my children came to me, can I have a bar of chocolate? No, you can't. Please, please, please don't keep arguing. Till you have to thank them and throw them out the room. Tell them, you can't have a bar of chocolate because you are now Fleisch, the chocolate is milk. Oh, no problem. Not another sound that your mouth. Oh, good. What's the difference? You want the chocolate, you didn't get it. Then you give me a whole hassle for half an hour. You would say, hey, it's milk, your Fleisch. No problem. So once a child is educated from early on, they see, hey, it's possible to live that way. I've lived that way. So don't tell me it's a hassle. It's not a hassle at all. It's a routine, like everything else in life. So the convert, no, he doesn't have to know everything. They don't teach him the whole, we teach him the basics. And then it's, for me too, it's still a lifelong experience, a lifelong learning experience. The study of Torah does not end when you go to Cheder or when you go to Yeshiva. The study of Torah is literally to the last moment of your life. You keep going on and on and on. I can go over the same text 20 times, and each time it's a new discovery. Whatever I learned yesterday, that's one thing. Today is something making no discovery. Besides a lot of commentaries and super commentaries and super commentaries, etc., etc., there's new insight. But I thought we'd have an early night tonight. My own fault.
I think we've come to the end, and I want to a few thank yous before we conclude. There's a special thank you to people who helped put this program together, Chris Cooper and Brian Ellsworth from Pro Media, who supplied the sound system and the staging. Obviously want to thank our panel for the care and trouble they took to formulate the questions. And of course, Rabbi Schochet, we want to thank you for coming here. I'm amazed that you are probably on Toronto time, which means it's coming up to 1:45 right now. And
I was in LA yesterday.
Oh, is that it? Okay. Well, that probably explains it. You had
Oh no, that's just over the weekend was in Milwaukee.
a chance to acclimatize yourself. You're obviously looking as short now as it was at the beginning of the evening. So we want to thank you for coming out here and sharing your perspective with us. And I hope it's been a thought-provoking and interesting evening for us all to take home and consider. There are, as I understand it, books. Rabbi Schochet has some books that he's authored that are available for sale at the back of the room. And I'm sure the rabbi will be around for a while. And those of you who have questions, no, he's not going to be around.
At 7 o'clock.
He's got to leave. So anyway, we want to thank you again, all of you, for coming, and look forward to seeing you at our next